Hello and welcome to the After Sermon Podcast, where we look at a Bible topic, character, or concept. And today we're looking at the topic of struggling for your relationship with God as we study the sermon, Fighting Face to Face. A lot of the time people will stop fighting because it's easier to fall for the allure of the flesh and the eyes and the pride of life.
You can have that no matter where you come from. You can have that relationship because you just got to have your eyes open to who he is.
The beauty on the outside fades, but for a Christian who is developing inwardly, you're blossoming like a flower.
You can trust God because he's literally the one person who is never going to do anything to abuse your trust. Hi, my name is Christopher, and ladies and gentlemen, you are in for quite the treat because today we have two very esteemed guests with us. We have Mr. Mitchell Sonta.
Hey guys.
And Mr. Jesse Marks.
Hello everyone.
Now, gents, I'm putting you on the spot here. This isn't in the script, but...
Alright.
Sure.
For the listeners back at home, you would all be familiar with the fact that the Mighty Warriors website is now officially up and running.
Yeah.
And I want to get your thoughts and impressions on how you like it, how you think it's been going so far. What do you think, boys?
I think it's really cool. I've been reading through some of the articles and stuff, and there's some stuff in there that I didn't even know, so...
Yeah, that's great.
Like, even, just reading through it myself, I've been learning a lot of cool stuff, so...
Awesome.
I have to be honest, I do have some inside information, so I do know it's going quite well. And no, I think it's wonderful. It looks really good, great articles, and I think it's off to a great start.
Awesome. Well, listeners at home, make sure to check out that Mighty Warrior Ministries. You can find it at mighty-warrior.org. That is mighty-warrior.org. And you can get a range of things. You can get access to all of our sermons and podcasts all in one neat place. You can get articles on heaps of different topics. As of this recording, we just put out a new article. I'm not going to say which one, so this doesn't get dated really badly. But we put out a new article today, and we put out a whole bunch of different articles. We've even got like a Bible study series on there. A series of 6 studies that take you through the kind of story of the Bible in a nutshell. So, go and make sure to check that out. Do yourself a favor and check out Mighty Warrior Ministries. For Pete's sake, just do it. Anyway, let's get into our personal takeaways. And I'm interested first to hear from you, Jesse. What was one personal takeaway? What was something that really resonated with you in this sermon?
Yeah, I personally think you did a really good job. As you said, looking at the story, you wonder, how do you get an application from this story? But no, you really hit it on the mark. I love how our relationship with God is like a struggle, because it really is, isn't it? It's, I don't know, just one thought I had, isn't something you specifically said, but no, the thought came to mind. When you're in a struggle, you have to be close. You have to be intimate with that person. Yeah. You can't have a struggle and be distant, as you said. I thought it was really good. Just struggling with God, the intimacy with God. And sure, it can be hard sometimes. I think that's something we have to acknowledge about the Christian journey. Sure, it can be hard, but at the same time, you're wrestling it out with God. He's there with you. He's there giving you the strength to push through the journey. And I thought it was really good.
Awesome. Yeah, I love the fact that the person who sustains you through the fight is also the one that you're fighting against.
Exactly.
Or fighting with, rather, I should say, as opposed to against. But it's such an interesting concept. What about you, Mitchell? What was a personal takeaway that you got?
Well, yeah, with the whole concept of wrestling with God, as Jacob did, and then comparing that to our walk today, it's something that I hadn't really thought through before. It's we've thought about it a little bit, and we've heard about it from pastors and stuff, but really understanding that it is a mirror of our walk with God, and what's involved in our walk with God. And the other cool thing that you did was you're talking about personalities and friendships and reasons for distancing yourself from people, or reasons that friendships break down. And it's it was really cool to see that, because it's really important to look at yourself and sort of consider the reasons why you do things. Don't just do things and just do them for no reason and just act on a whim. But think about the reasons behind actions. And and that's sort of what Jacob had to do. He wrestled, so he had to have some sort of drive to keep doing that, right?
And it's interesting how much was going on inside his mind as he was fighting a physical battle.
Yeah.
It was taking place on two levels: the physical, and then you could say the mental, and also the spiritual. It's very much a spiritual battle. Well, I'm going to ask a bit more of a personal question. Feel free to pass this one up, and I'll answer first. And the question is, of the three reasons given as to why people push themselves away from God or stop fighting with God, what would be the one which you feel that you relate to the most? And so just for a quick recap for our listeners at home, the three main reasons were feeling of unworthiness, fear, or boredom. And so for me, I know that I find a lot of the time in my personal relationships with, say, friends and family, fear is the one that drives me the most. There's always that sense of you don't want to lose something valuable. But I think when it comes to God, sometimes I will fall more often into the trap of boredom, purely because it's very easy as humans to get caught in routines, and we can find routines really drab. And as opposed to adding something new or dynamic, or as opposed to fighting to rediscover that first love, really the easy option really is just to give up. And so I know, like, for example, sometimes it's difficult to get that motivation in the morning to do your devotions, because you begin to think of the devotions as a routine, not as having not as an opportunity to connect with someone that you're in a loving relationship with. So I know that for me, struggling to fight against the boredom of routine is one that I personally related to the most. Are you guys happy to say anything, or?
Sure. Oh, you go, Mitch.
So for me, I actually feel the unworthiness bit for friends and stuff like that, and it's like I'm going to say it's not an unselfish unworthiness. It's like I wish that I could keep hanging out with people. It's just I feel like people look at me and they see characteristics that aren't good enough, and see characteristics that need improving or that are less than them, and so that's what drives me away. It's like I don't want to push people to spend time with someone that isn't good enough, and so that's why I distance myself. And with God, it's sometimes that it's like when you go wrong, when you're walking with God and then you stumble, sometimes it's like a feeling of unworthiness. It's like, oh man, I don't like. First off, like David does, you got to bring that to God, right? You've got to bring it to God in prayer and explain to Him what's gone wrong, and through that He can help you, right? But sometimes I don't do that because I'm like, I don't want to, put this on God, or rather, it's just, I don't want to have to tell God that I've sinned again. And so maybe that's a fear thing. I don't know. Probably a bit of a mix.
Yeah, it can be a bit of a mix because sometimes we can have the fear of maybe not losing God, but of failing Him or like disappointing Him. So sometimes that feeling of unworthiness and feeling of fear can overlap and cross over a little bit. What about you, Jesse? What of those three do you think you related to the most?
Sure. I definitely think it's a mix. I think you've nailed it. Those two things are really big reasons. But I think I'd have to side more with Mitch. I think unworthiness. Like, I remember what you said, quoting an Ellen White text, how Satan brought those feelings of guilt and shame into Jacob while he was wrestling God.
Yeah.
I think that can be a real trap we can fall into. Yes, in a sense that we are unworthy, but I think the devil really plays on that, and he really puts those thoughts into our heads, like, Jesse, you can't go visit God. Look at all these bad things you've done.
Yeah.
And he points them out, and he brings them to your remembrance. But that unworthiness, I think Ellen White also says, another author says something along the lines of this, that unworthiness is a very, I don't know, it's almost like what's the word I'm looking for? It's another reason why we should be coming to God even more. As in, because of our weakness, it's an extra argument for God actually stepping in and helping us.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is like, if you think about it like that, it's like, wow.
It's like it can go either way sort of situation, right? Like you're at a crossroads. Either you say, I'm unworthy, I can't go to God, or you say, I'm unworthy, I have to go to God. And like that decision is huge because if you go to God, it's such an awesome opportunity to once again be shown God's love for you. Like this huge, great being still loves you like as much as he did before. And like that's such an awesome opportunity to rekindle your faith and be strengthened again. Or you go the other direction and like, you know, forget the promises of God in the Bible and you can just go down a dark road, you know?
Exactly.
And go further and further away.
And like something else I try and think about more, but I often forget, is that God knows us for who we are right now. He knows everything about us, so there's no point fearing what God might think of us if we confess a sin here or there. He already knows we've done it. And he's... Yeah.
Sorry, keep going.
Oh, yeah, and he loves us anyway, so go Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's a little bit like Adam and Eve, you know, when they're hiding from God, because then they realize they're naked, right? And then God asks them, Adam, where are you hiding? Now, obviously, God knew where they were hiding, but he wanted Adam to confess it. He wanted Adam to be the one to come up and admit it.
Because he wants a relationship.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And so, as you said, Jesse, it's not like when we come up to God and we go, hey, God, I did this. He's going to go, what? Like, he's not going to be surprised. He's going to be like, yeah, I knew that. I was just waiting for you to come to me.
He'll be sipping his tea and then just spit it all over the room. What? I didn't know that.
Gabriel, get over here. How did I miss this?
But yeah, just to be clear, guys, he won't do that.
He knows, but he wants you to come to him because, again, this is like a relational thing that God is looking after. Awesome. Well, let's move into the main meat of the podcast, the cutting room floor. Mitchell, what is the cutting room floor?
Cutting room floor is the segment where we discuss the parts of the sermon that didn't make it into the final product, and we discuss them at length.
All right. Well, what I want to talk about first of all, Jesse, I told the story about the minions in this sermon.
Ah, yes.
And
beautiful story.
Would you care to tell us who was the mastermind behind this this prank?
the mastermind, one mind could not come up with the brilliance of this prank.
Look at him. He's always so shy
so
about
humble.
this. So humble. All right. I want you, for the listeners at home, again, if you haven't seen the sermon Fighting Face to Face, go to the link below. I forgot to mention, this podcast is full of spoilers.
Oh.
We forgot that part. But
true.
Make sure to check it out, and you can hear the story of the minions. But basically, my room got covered in minions. And you can find a picture of it if you go and watch the sermon. And Jesse and a lot of my college friends were the ones behind this. So Jesse, for our listeners at home, would you mind recounting how this prank began and what steps you went to go through it? And give us a little insight into the other side of the Minion story.
Behind the scenes, okay. Well, let's see. It all started when one of our college friends invited me into his room and he said, hey, Kate, come in, Jesse. I've got something to show you. And so I went in and he started looking at his laptop and he had this cover of a bed cover with a minion on it, a huge minion on it. He's like, I don't know, Jess, I'm really tempted to buy this and put it on Chris's bed somehow. I was like, oh boy, let's do it. So, it started from there, and then I don't know, we just kept talking about it, and it just kept escalating. I don't know, we were walking around the room, and I was like, oh, it wouldn't be a pretty good idea if we just got little minions, and we hid them all around Chris's room. So, if he wanted a sock one day, he would open up his sock drawer, oh, minion, there it is.
I was still finding minions like 2 weeks later, I kid you not. Like, there was ones tucked in really obscure corners that, like, Jesse had to tell me, he's like, I don't think you found all the minions yet, so I had to go looking for them.
Yeah. So that was the plan of it, and then we just sort of figured out how do we actually get these minions into Chris's room without him knowing. And so we had to let a few people know. We told a few people to get cameras so we can get the recording, the live moment, the reaction. So we got that set up, and then we waited for the sheet to come in, and we cut up all the minions, and we just had to wait for the right time when Chris was away. So we had a double period, if you remember, one time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We thought,
ethics and philosophy, and we'd just done a quiz.
Yeah. So we're like, no, Chris is not going to expect anything. And we got 2 periods to get this out of the way. So I was sort of like a guard duty. I was making sure that you would stay in class, and if you left early for whatever reason, I would let them know. And then while that was happening, our mates back at college were setting up the room.
Oh man,
And then the rest is history.
the rest is history. It's a good story. It's a good story.
Yeah.
Ah, man. I still have those bed sheets. Actually, funnily
Oh,
enough,
really?
yeah. I didn't bring them with me to college this time when I packed. They're still at home. But somebody at college, he came up to me and asked, "Hey, can I have the bed sheets?" I was like, "What do you want them for?" And he goes, "Well, I don't have bed sheets." I'm like, "Why do you want these ones?" And I said, "No, they've got as much as they've scarred me. They have sentimental, nostalgic value now, so I need to keep them." So
Nice.
I've been burdened with these bed sheets that I can never get rid of. It's all right. It's all right. It's a curse with no disguise. There's no blessing in there. Anyway, so.
True.
There we go, a little insight back into the Minion story. But let's get into the rest of the podcast. And what I wanted to look at was some other reasons as to why people leave God. We looked at 3 main ones in the sermon, but there were some that I thought of that I thought maybe didn't quite fit as well with the other ones, or were a little bit more self-explanatory, but you could go deeper, but I just didn't have the time to go in depth. So, of the 4-ish reasons, I think the 4th point will count as one. We'll count this as number 1 nonetheless, and that is a lack of trust. Think about this. When you are hurt repeatedly by a number of people in your life, whether that's family or friends, what is the natural reaction to that?
Well, I mean, if it's someone that you do trust, like family members or close friends, your immediate reaction is like you don't know how to react, right?
Yeah.
I think at first you either get really angry or whatever. You might react emotionally, but really you don't know what's going on because your brain's like, whoa, hang on, we trusted that person, and that can break that pretty drastically, I think.
And so let's say that there's a repeated amount of incidents like this, and each time the trust that you once had is being violated, what do you think would be the eventual result? I mean, what do you think would be the eventual result of that continued breach of trust?
I guess you would eventually start to have trust issues, wouldn't you? You would just stop having those trusting relationships altogether. Because you're afraid of getting hurt, yeah.
Exactly. And one of the common ways that I think most people, I think a lot of people do this, it's not uncommon, is that we put up boundaries around ourselves. Because we go, all right, every time I let someone in, I get hurt. So it's better for me to just put up these walls and not let anyone in. Now, I got to be careful here because I'm no expert on this subject, but there is a necessity for healthy boundaries. Every person needs to have boundaries. But you can also have unhealthy boundaries where, like, to the point where you no longer allow anyone into your life. And yeah, that isolation isn't healthy mentally, physically, spiritually. It's not good. And so what we can do sometimes is we get this mindset where we've created these walls to block out people. And so we often then go, okay, well, why would I trust God? And so a lot of people actually have great issues trusting God. Now, one of the common ways is we call God Father all the time, right? But a lot of people grow up with maybe absent fathers or abusive fathers. And so when somebody gets up at the front of church and says, our Heavenly Father, they immediately have trust issues with this father figure because of previous experience. As soon as they hear the word Father, what goes up? Boom, the walls are up. And so a lot of the time, this just not wanting to be hurt can happen, and we push God away because we're afraid of what He might actually do to us, which is a very interesting mentality. But what I want to do is look at Ephesians 5:25, because just like all the other reasons for why we push God away from our lives, this reason is also unjustified. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 25. And Mitchell, can you read that for us when you get there?
Yep. I'm on my way. All right. Verse 25?
Yep.
Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her.
And then in verse 28 and 29 it says, so husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. But no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as the Lord does the church. So here Paul is giving a mandate to how husbands are to treat their wives. He says, treat them with respect, care for them, and don't do anything negative, or don't do anything harmful to them. Because he says, basically, okay, when you and your wife become married, you become one flesh, right? So he says, you wouldn't do anything to hurt your own flesh, so don't do anything to hurt your wife. But then he also draws this comparison, this parallel, and he says, in the same way that you love your wife, use the way that Jesus loves his people as a model. Use that as your model for how to take care of your wife. And so we know that Jesus would never do anything to hurt or harm us. That's what we read here. Paul says, don't hurt your wife.
Well, in verse 30 it says, "For we are members of his body, his flesh and his bones," right? Like, when do you ever want to hurt your own body? Hurt your own
Never.
flesh and bones, right? So, like, if we're part of Jesus' body,
Exactly.
then he's not really wanting to hurt us. He's wanting to build us.
And, so there you have this idea that you can trust God because he's literally the one person who is never going to do anything to abuse your trust. Like, family and friends, no matter how close, even accidentally, may do something to hurt you. I think we end up hurting someone in our lives, you know. It's just a consequence of being sinful. But God is the one person who is never going to do that to you. And then, Mitchell, could you read for us Matthew 7, verse 11?
"If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him?"
And so that kind of is addressing the topic of the earthly father versus heavenly father thing. Here we're told that God is only going to give you good things. He's only got your best interests in mind, and as a result of that, he's not going to betray your trust. Now, one other thing that I found interesting, just while we're talking about boundaries, is what is an appropriate way to maintain boundaries? Because we want to not be in isolation because that's unhealthy. We don't want to be intimately close to every single person we know, otherwise we'll be, the term is fusion, where you're just inextricably connected to someone in an unhealthy way. And having no boundaries and full interaction with people just leads to absolute chaos. So really a good intimate relationship, or just like good relationships in general, consists of both connections as well as appropriate boundaries. And so what I think is a good verse to explain that is Matthew 10, verse 16. And Jesus says, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves." I think that's a really good mentality to have, because if you let everyone in, you're being a bit too naive. But if you push everybody out, you're being a bit too cold and reserved. Whereas if you're both harmless and wise at the same time, I think that allows you to have proper and good boundaries.
It's very, very balanced, isn't it? Very balanced counsel. I like it, yeah.
Yeah, I love that verse. All right, so number one was lack of trust. Number two is loving the world. Jesse, could you read out for us 2 Timothy 4 and verse 10? And this is our second reason as to why people run away from God.
So 2 Timothy 4:10.
Yep.
For Demas has forsaken me, having loved this present world, and has departed for Thessalonica, Crescens for Galatia, Titus for Dalmatia.
So, Paul's talking about somebody who left the faith because he loved the world.
The present world.
And it's a big reason why lots of people, just leave. Think about the number of youth who leave the church. Actually, before even loving the world, actually, the primary reason why young people leave the church is they don't find authenticity in their homes. Or in other words, their parents or father figures don't match up with the way that God wants them to. So, that's just a link back to lack of trust. But yeah, that's a huge reason for why so many young people leave our church today, because the world presents so much good stuff, and yeah, people fall for it.
Yeah, it's enticing.
And the funny thing is, Satan hasn't had to come up with anything new. He just gives the exact same thing, repackaged every time, and every generation, people, the elders of the generation will say, don't do this. This is what happens. This is where it will lead. It's a bad thing. And then, for some reason, each new generation thinks they're going to be exempt from the rule. That they can do X sin and still be good. It's just like,
Oh, and the real problem is, like, as you're saying, it's a diffusive thing where one person, so let's say a father, you know, they don't follow God in every way. Maybe they follow God at church and they go home and they don't, right? They, through that behavior, they're having an impact on their children, right? And so the same can be said for every member of a church family, because a church is a big family. If we say to the church, we want you to change the way you're living and be more like Jesus, and then every member in the church says, oh, well, I'll wait for this guy to do it, or I'll wait for the other guys to do it before I'm not going to change myself, we never change. And that's, you know, I think this ties back into a previous episode of the After Sermon podcast.
oh yes, which are you referring to?
I can't remember the name, Christopher, but I remember it was about the crowd. You know, people follow the crowd and they expect the rest of the crowd to do things for them.
The innocent bystander?
That's the one.
Yes. The diffusion of responsibility.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's like that, you know. Basically, the answer is, if you feel like everyone else should change something, then you better change it yourself. Just, you know, start with one person. That's a pretty good place to start.
Gandhi had a good quote on that, didn't he? Be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah.
I think, pretty much like that, eh?
Michael Jackson, you want to make the world a better place? You know what? I think I literally made the exact same joke in the last podcast. I've already made that lame Michael Jackson joke before. It's not even a joke. Far out. All right, let's move on. In 1 John 12 and verse 15, here's what John...
1 John chapter 2, verses 12 to 15.
Oh, yeah, sorry, there is no chapter 12. Sorry, you'd be very lost if you're looking for that. Yes, chapter 2, verse 12. John writes, I write to you, little children, because your sins are forgiven you for his name's sake. I write to you, fathers, because you have known him who is from the beginning. That's a lot of preamble. Let's get down to business. Sorry, I'll cut this out. So let's move on to 1 John chapter 2 and beginning in verse 15. And here's what John says to the church. He says, do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Well, and let's just stop there for a second. We can look at let's break down the other verses later. That is some intense language. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. That is heavy. John is clearly creating a dichotomy here.
Yeah.
There are two sides to this. You give your allegiance to one side. You are either in the world or you are either in God's kingdom.
I'll tell you what's nice about it though. Like, yeah, it's intense and it's like, it's almost damning, you know? But it's simple. And like, that's what's awesome about God, is he's just so simple, because that's what we need as humans. We need sort of a yes or a no option. And this is what that is. It's like, you know, you follow God or you follow the world. There's no in between. Because if there was an in between, how hard would it be to walk on that tightrope, you know?
The grey area,
And so then moving on in verse 16, it says, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And again, these are just the same things that Satan keeps repackaging. The exact same product, just with a slightly different brand for whatever time he's in. And think about that. Okay, so John says, if you love the world, you do not love God. And then he gives a list of examples of things that classify as loving the world. So if someone is indulging in lust of flesh, the eyes, and pride of life, John is saying that must mean, what do I mean? John is saying that must mean they do not have the love of the Father in them.
Well, these are the three things that Jesus was tempted with, right? So these,
In the wilderness.
yeah, these things encompass sin. It's basically, I think it's just saying all that is in the world is sin.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty good summary overall of what sin looks like. And then in verse 17, John kind of shows the futility of loving the world because he says, the world is passing away. He's like, why would you invest in this? This is a bad investment. He says, and the lust of it.
Unless you work in a funeral home or something.
Oh my gosh.
We're going to cut this out. It was a fine joke.
It's a fine joke. I approve of this joke.
All right, let's leave this whole segment in.
I like it.
No, we're cutting it out.
Perfect.
And he says, then he says, but he who does the will of God abides forever. I like that. That is cool. Yeah, and so a lot of the time people will stop fighting that fight with God because it's easier to fall for the allure of the flesh and the eyes and the pride of life. But we're told to continue on, to persevere, and to love God as opposed to the things of the world.
Oh, just a thought. It's interesting. All these things are very tangible. They're visible, aren't they? They're physical. You can see them. You can taste them. You can touch them. But yeah, as John said, they're all passing away. And I read a quote recently. I think something like that. But it said, as humans, it's so easy to just get caught up in what we see in front of us, the world we see, and it's very hard for us to see things that we can't see. And I guess in a sense, I don't know, maybe that's what John is trying to get here. We're always caught up in the things around us. I think it's important as Christians we take the time to think about the things that we can't see, and to think about the Father who's God. We can't see him, but we need to think about him more. And I don't know, just like
that's an awesome point. That's an awesome point, man. Like it's like that's why God's invisible. It's like, he asks us to trust in the invisible because he doesn't want to give us another taste, another sight to enjoy. He wants us to trust in something simple and something that isn't flashy and worldly. He just wants to give us something that is just bare basics, pure and love.
I know the clearer our spiritual vision is, the one we see God, but the physical things that we can see sort of fade away.
Yeah.
Which is interesting, isn't it?
That fits perfectly into the main message of what Paul's talking about in 2 Corinthians. There's these apostles within his church who keep trying to say that Paul isn't a good apostle because he's not rich, he's not wealthy, and he suffers persecution. So externally, or on a physical side, tangible, it looks like Paul's a complete failure. But Paul says, you guys have missed the whole point. The point isn't what's going on the outside, it's what's happening internally, inside. And I think the best verse that exemplifies this is in chapter 4 and verse 7. He says, but we have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the excellence of the power of God may be of God and not of us. So think of, like a little jar. It's boring, it's bland, you can buy it cheap. But inside of it, it's got this treasure. And it works the same way with us. Externally, people may look at us and just go, oh, well, they don't really get to have a lot of fun. They're not doing they're not indulging in all these things that we read about in 1 John. Man, it's sucky to live a life following God. But internally, they've missed the thing which is internal, which is of eternal relevance. And as John said before, the things externally, all these sins, they pass away, but the gift of salvation that we possess and the indwelling of the Holy Spirit that we possess internally is eternal. So I think that's really cool. And I think it's cool as well. I've heard this quote before. For the listeners at home, there was this man called Daniel who was taken into exile into Babylon, a pagan nation. And it said Daniel was in Babylon, but Babylon wasn't in Daniel. So even though Daniel was living in the kingdom of a pagan god full of sin, even though he was living in an enemy nation, the enemy didn't come into his heart. And that's referring physically to the invading nation, and spiritually the enemy working in that place. And like if we look around our world today, we are very much on enemy territory.
Yeah.
You really don't have to look far. You can just turn on the TV, and within like 5 minutes, probably even less, you'll find something immoral, something that's really just kind of gross and sinful. You don't have to look far to realize that we're in enemy grounds.
Yep.
And so our real test is making sure that though we are in this world, the world is not in us. And I think if we understand that, we'll have a better chance of continuing our fight with God, because it's good to know your enemy, and it's good to know what you're up against, so that you don't slowly compromise to the point where you've given up fighting. You don't make those small little steps of, I just want sin here, a little sin there, and the next thing you know, you start fighting and you've let go of your blessing. You've let go of your inheritance. And then the third and final reason for why so many people decide to give up on God is that they mistake knowledge of God for a relationship with God. Think about the Pharisees, right? The Pharisees, they knew everything there was to know about the law. They could quote their scripture inside out, back to front, and they did all the right rituals. They'd say all the right prayers. But Jesus says to them, he rips into them, he says, you guys are whitewashed tombs. This fits perfectly, didn't even mean for this. He says, on the outside, externally, you guys look great. But inside, you're full of dead worms, you're gross. There's nothing of value inside of you. You're spiritually dead. It's that pattern again of, it's not the external, it's internal. And I know that I personally did this for a while in my life. I mistook knowledge of God for a relationship with God. And it wasn't even because I didn't want one. If you haven't picked up the pattern yet, I'm just a bit of a lazy person, which is, again, why, for me, the trap I often fall into is just getting a bit bored of the routine. Having a discipline to do routines is admittedly a struggle for me. And so investing in a relationship takes a lot of time and effort. So I was just like, well, I know all about God, so I'm fine, right? But had no relationship with God, purely because of my own just laziness, really. I don't know, have you guys ever found that you've done the same, mistaking a knowledge of God for a relationship with God?
I think growing up in the church, it's very easy to do that to some extent, because like from the moment, like, you're born, essentially. Like, you're hearing about the stories about the Bible and about God and about Jesus, which is really good. But like the culture we live in, it's very a knowledge-based culture. So you just assume that just because you're learning all this stuff about the Bible, that's what it's all about, and you don't really think about what more there is to it. But I definitely agree.
Yeah, no, go for it.
And like similarly with me, like we all grew up in the church. And, we were taught about God in Sabbath school, and we occasionally, for me at least, read the Bible and, family worships and all that sort of stuff. And so you knew about God. And for me, I never thought that was a relationship. I sometimes thought, is this all there is to it? And I often actually said this to my parents a few times. It's like, I envy people that are new to the church, new to faith, because they always seem so excited, They always seem so excited to find this new thing that they've never had before. And I'm like, I said this to my parents, I was like, I kind of wish I had that, because, I don't feel excited. I don't feel anything about this. It's just, part of life, I guess. And like through all the processes that God went through to bring me to Him, it's like, you can have that no matter where you come from. You can have that relationship because you just got to have your eyes open to who He is and the reality of Him being your Father.
Yeah, that's powerful. I like what Paul writes in Romans chapter 2. Jesse, do you want to read out for us verses 21 through to 24 in that chapter?
Yes, I can. You therefore who teach another, do you not teach yourself? You who preach that a man should not steal, do you steal? You who say, do not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who make your boast in the law, do you dishonor God through breaking the law? For the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you, as it is written.
So here he's speaking to the Pharisees and he goes, you keep telling the Gentiles or the non-Jewish people, oh, look at these people, they commit adultery. And Paul just says, be quiet. You guys do the exact same. Or he says, you preach, do not steal. And she goes, you guys steal all the time. And I think the main reason was, they go, we have a knowledge of God. Because if you read the first 2 chapters, it's all about having knowledge of God's revelation. So the Pharisees are all going, the Jewish people in general here, they're just going, haha, we have this knowledge of God, so we know what's right. Paul's like, yeah, but knowing what's right is very different from doing what's right. He says, you guys aren't actually practically applying anything that you know, and so you've basically squandered the knowledge that you have of God.
And it's like hidden sin versus exposed sin. The Pharisees were very big on their exposing of the sin of others, you know. And what Paul's saying here is, like, just take a look at yourself, guys, you know. And everyone's guilty of this. Like, I'm guilty of this. Everyone's guilty of this. We're so good often at looking at other people and saying, you're so sinful. But we neglect, maybe it's not the same sin we have, but maybe it's, you know, it's even mentioned under the same commandment. It's just a different form of that sin that we hold within our hearts, you know?
It's like, get this plank out of your own eye before the speck in your friend.
Yeah, exactly,
sort of
yeah.
deal.
Yep. And like external sin is better in a way than internal sin, because external sin is so easy to, you know, like everyone can see it, so the sinner can just give it to God like it's nothing. But internal sin, it's like, oh, I've got to hide this.
Exactly, because nobody else knows, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, does God know? Like,
yeah, as we said before, he knows. He knows what's up. Yeah.
Sort of.
Awesome.
Yeah, sure. Just another thought. Jumping off what you said, Mitch. I think sometimes it's easy. Like the Pharisees, Jesus called them whitewash tombs. But yeah, I think as Christians, sometimes it's really easy to fall into the trap, and just really anyone, to work on our outward appearance but not our inward appearance. Yeah, so we work on those, like you said, those external sins, the ones that people can see, and we work really, really hard on those, but we neglect those inward ones that really are the heart of the issue, but only God can see.
And the other thing is, like, along that line, sometimes it isn't even deliberate. Sometimes it isn't like a deliberate sinful action that we work on external sin and hide internal sin.
It's just natural to us,
Yeah, exactly. It's like you get in a rut and you don't see what's going on. Like, you know, you point out other people's sins constantly, and you at the same time you're building this like festering ulcer of sin inside yourself, and you can't get help. You can't help that, and it can destroy a person. You know, it can destroy character. And so therefore, I'd say that people that, you know, don't appear sinful can be some of the most sinful people and need some of the most help.
Yeah, well, I think the Pharisees were a perfect example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Interestingly, Peter says in 1 Peter 3, verse 3, now this is, he's specifically addressing women in this passage, but I think you can apply the principle in general to the Christian faith. He says, do not let your adornment be merely outward. I love that already, outward. Fitting into the theme perfectly.
Yeah.
Arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, the internal, with the incorruptible beauty. Incorruptible is interesting as well, because 1 Corinthians 15, incorruptible is used to indicate immortality or eternity. And so again, this inside you have eternity, right? You have that promise of salvation, your inheritance, if you will. Yes, he says, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. And that is a principle that we can all apply, that the external really doesn't matter. It's what's internally, what is happening, what is your character, how is your relationship with God, the internal, private, hidden things, which are of the greater importance.
I love that.
Sorry?
Oh, no. I was just going to say, I love that incorruptible beauty as well, because I just picture an aging person, especially for a Christian. The beauty on the outside fades, you grow wrinkles, you grow old. But for a Christian who is developing inwardly, you're blossoming like a flower and you're just growing more beautiful. It's like, yeah.
That's a cool analogy.
That's what I see. So no, I love that verse as well.
That's awesome.
And yeah, so this lines up with those things, like the idea that we can get caught up in worrying about the external, worrying about the outward stuff, and as Jesse was saying, like as you get older, it's like you can't control the outward stuff deteriorates. But what's really cool about what you said is that like you can remember that God sees the inside, and God sees this, as you said, blossoming Christian.
And that's the only thing that's going to last forever as well. I mean,
yeah. Exactly.
Sorry.
And along that line, this is a walk on this earth. If we're walking with God, it doesn't end. So like the work we're putting in now is only building on the work that we're going to put in later when we're in heaven with God. Like that's such a cool thing that like it isn't like we work here to try and reach a threshold at which we get to heaven. It's like we start working here right now because this is a work that begins now and continues all through eternity.
Yeah.
This is such a valuable work right now in the same way that all of eternity will be valuable. Yeah, and so this is the story that came to mind, is the story of Mary and Martha when Jesus was visiting them, and Martha was in the kitchen, preparing food and doing all the stuff that she thought she needed to do because this is part of serving and being a good person, and she wasn't wrong, and I Jesus would have seen why she was doing it and he would have appreciated it. But what he was like, but Mary got it, she was at Jesus' feet for the spiritual food, for the internal. And Martha, as I said, Jesus understood. Martha was doing her best. Martha was doing what she thought was good. But the problem with that was she couldn't see where she was going wrong. Like, she got so caught up in the works and all that she missed the relationship. And through that, she actually got, she got frustrated with Mary that Mary wasn't doing the works too,
Yeah.
And like that's such a good analogy for our walk with God as Christians, is that sometimes we get caught up in the works, and because we're caught up in the works, we look at those that aren't doing the works and we get angry at them. Or frustrated. And like we can get caught up in the wrong stuff, and we're not deliberately sinning. Like it's not like we deserve reprimand or whatever. It's just that
we're confused.
We're a bit lost, a bit confused. We need to be redirected, and I think that's a cool story because it shows that just because we're stuck on the external, as pretty much all humans are, no matter like even if you're like real close to God, you can still be a bit stuck on the external. But even if you're stuck on the external, God doesn't condemn you. He just looks at you and he can see where you're a bit caught up, and he intends to change that.
That's a really good analogy. I like that story. It fits perfectly, into what we're talking about. Okay, so in summary, the three main other reasons... actually, let's do all six. So the three reasons given in the sermon were unworthiness, fear, and boredom. And the three reasons that we looked in depth at today were a lack of trust, loving the world, and mistaking a knowledge of God for a relationship with God. And as we've seen with all of these reasons, they are not justifiable excuses to ending your relationship with God. Instead, we need to persevere every day, fight that spiritual battle until we can come face to face with God and finally get our blessing, our inheritance.
So, Christopher, do you have any recommended readings?
I do, but this recommended reading isn't going to be for all of our listeners.
Oh.
I'm going to be...
Is it just for me? Is it just for Jesse? Because that doesn't make any sense. Because we're doing a podcast to the public here, man. And we need to give recommended readings to the listeners, not those involved in making the podcast.
Well, I want to give it
Valid
for
point.
all those in the elite exclusive brethren, those who externally look very...
Yeah, all right. That's me, boys.
Sure. What I'm going to recommend is a lecture by Dr. Jordan Peterson called Wrestling with Jacob. Now, you've probably heard of Jordan Peterson. He's pretty notable on YouTube, and he's a very intelligent, very smart man. But the reason I am giving it with a caveat is this. He is a psychologist, not a theologian. First and foremost, his study is in figuring out the human mind, not figuring out how the Bible works. And so when he's done an entire Bible series on deconstructing the Bible from a psychological view. And it's very interesting, but you will find that a lot of the times he does contradict good theology, because again, he's not a theologian. Or a lot of times he just doesn't have quite an in-depth knowledge of God and his character and will mistake a lot of things. And I'd be particularly wary of, he's a big fan of another psychologist, Carl Jung, whose some of his ideas are alright, but a lot of them are a bit in the deep, off in some faraway fairyland. So the reason I'm giving this is I think there are some good things that you can bring out from it, but it will take an incredible amount of discernment to be able to filter through the stuff which is not theologically sound. So I would recommend this for those of you who maybe a bit more advanced in your spiritual journey or a bit more advanced in your faith, and perhaps just want to test your brain out to see. Listen to a presentation that's about like 50% good and 50% trash, and sort out and filter through which is which. And I strongly encourage, pray for the Holy Spirit before listening to it to help you discern that. Ask for God to give you the wisdom to go through that. And I think you'll find it to be a very profitable exercise because a lot of the time we do dismiss other people outside of the church, but there's a lot of stuff we can learn from very clever people outside the church. But because they're missing that theological understanding, they will sometimes say stuff that doesn't quite match up. So I think it's a good idea to, if you want, wrestle with your faith in that way and work through that. So I would recommend Jordan Peterson's lecture, Jacob Wrestling with God, since it's relevant to what we're talking about today, and filter through, find the good, dismiss the bad, and hopefully be a profitable exercise for you listeners at home.
Very cool. All right, Jesse, so where can people find you if they're interested in learning more about you or hearing more of what you've got to say?
You can find me right here in the After 7 podcast or my YouTube channel, simply Jesse Marks. And Christopher, where can people find you?
The listeners at home can find me here fortnightly on the After 7 podcast, as well as writing some articles. If you want to see what my writing style is like, I'd say it's not half bad. You can look on the Mighty Warriors website and you'll find a stack of articles written by me in a variety of different topics that I think you'll find quite interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, all of you listeners at home. Remember, you can listen to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Podbean, basically anywhere. Go check out the Mighty Warriors website. It's a great resource for all sorts of good stuff, and you'll definitely be blessed by reading all the different things that our crew has come up with there. Make sure to come back next week for another episode of the After 7 podcast. And with that said, have a good one and
good night.